Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System provides materials and procedures for observing and assessing the reading levels and behaviors of students in grades K to 8. It is directly linked to Fountas and Pinnell levels A to Z and small group reading instruction using level books. A benchmark is a standard against which to measure something. In Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System, the standard is set by the benchmark books a student reads aloud and talks about during the assessment conference. These books have been written and edited and extensively field tested to ensure that they reflect the characteristics of text and the demands of text on the reader at each specific Fountas and Pinnell level. Fountas and Pinnell levels, created and refined as a teaching and assessment tool over the past 20 years, represent 26 points on a gradient of reading difficulty. Each point on that gradient, from the easiest level at A to the most challenging at level Z, represents a small but significant increase in the difficulty over the previous level. There are two benchmark books, a fiction and a non-fiction book, for each of these levels from A to Z in the Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System. Following the Benchmark Assessment System's standardized assessment procedures, you use these level benchmark books to identify each student's reading levels. Benchmark results yield optimal levels for independent reading and instructional reading at one point in time. The results will also provide information about the text level that will be too demanding to allow for effective learning by the student. The Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System is administered during a one-on-one teacher-student assessment conference. For about 30 minutes, the student reads aloud and talks about a series of benchmark books, while you observe and code the reader's behaviors on carefully constructed benchmark forms. Using established scoring conventions and procedures for analysis, you can not only establish the optimal learning levels, but also gather valuable information about each individual's reading processing, fluency, and comprehension, all of which give you insights about how to target your future teaching. Optimal diagnostic assessments that focus on phonics, word analysis, and vocabulary provide even more data to inform high-quality instruction. Administered once, the Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System conferences provide information to help you determine 3 reading levels for each student: benchmark independent, benchmark instructional, and recommended placement. Group students for reading instruction, select texts that will be productive for a student's instruction, plan efficient and effective instruction, identify students who need intervention and extra help, and diagnose particular areas of reading difficult. Administer more than once in a school year or across many school years, the Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System can do all of that, plus document students' progress across a school year and across grade levels. As readers progress through the levels, becoming increasingly competent readers, the A to Z gradient becomes a ladder of progress.
The biggest thing for me is after giving the Fountas and Pinnell assessment, I am given student-specific reading levels. So I use it to group my students for guided reading instruction throughout the school year. And it's our starting point for grouping our students.
Your students' reading level, again, can help you with instruction regarding grouping, for one thing. You know, and it helps you know, do you want to do mixed groups, or do you want to do same level groups? Sometimes you want a kid or two mixed in there with your lower or higher levels, just so that each student can see how other students read. And I think sometimes a student model, even though they may not know they're being a model, can give the other students who aren't quite there yet the inspiration or the know-how coming from a student. Well, this is how I do it. And sometimes it just has more impact than a student saying, this is how you should do it.
The use of the assessment has changed my methodology, because when I was doing them before we had been given the Fountas and Pinnell, I was just using the running records to determine reading levels. And the running records are an informal assessment to where these give me a lot more information. They tell me exactly where I need to start, and they tell me what instructional practices I should use for my students.
It's always interesting to know who does better with which type of genre, fiction or nonfiction. And knowing that can really help your instruction regarding a student's strengths in reading, what strategies you should kind of pinpoint or focus with practicing for that student. So Fountas and Pinnell really gives you a wide overview of their strengths and weaknesses.
It really helps that it's a united assessment tool, to where I'm giving my students folders in September from kindergarten. It has all the information I need in that folder. I know exactly where to start. I know what I need to do to help that student, where I need to focus. I know the student's reading patterns. and I keep all of my information in it for the year, and then I pass it along to their next teacher. So it helps that we all are using the same tool.
It can give a lot of insight into how the student is thinking as they're reading. You know, it's a mindset to them as well, I think. So Fountas and Pinnell just gives you a lot of feedback regarding a broad overview, fluency, how they see the word, the syntax part of it, as well as the comprehension with the comprehension questions.
The rewards to me are how the detailed information that we get from it. I know specifics of my students' reading patterns. I know instructional practices, where to start. It's a very detailed assessment, so that helps me with knowing about my students.
Well, my students like to know their reading levels. They're very insistent upon knowing their level when the test is completed, and they always want to, did I go up a level? Did I go up 2 levels? And I haven't used that, but the students themselves have said, I'm a Z, I'm an X, I'm a T or a U possibly, and it's been a fun camaraderie in where they have bolstered each other. They really have. I haven't seen any teasing in regards to that, but they've bolstered each other, and I think encourage each other, because they know, especially the Z's. The Z's don't say anything, but the students that aren't want to be there. They really want to be in the academic area of the X, Y, and Z, which is considered grade level. Another thing is, prior to using Fountas and Pinnell, I have to say that I just kind of assumed, wishful thinking maybe, that all of my students were reading at grade level. It's just something that's really kind of important when you're doing some pretty neat stories that are mostly inferential. They're not cut and dried. You have to really do some critical thinking to figure out the plot and character motivation and stuff like that. So knowing now that my students all aren't, and I did know that, but you just had this kind of grandiose scheme of your class and your students, but knowing that your students aren't all on grade level makes you take a step back and say, how can I use the materials that I'm presented with to present to my students in a manner that they can find challenging, fulfilling, and get something out of it, because I think that's what it's all about, is getting something out of this that you can take with you, a lesson learned, knowing that character kind of reminds you of yourself or whatever. So if they're not on grade level, that's difficult. So Fountas and Pinnell has supplied me with information to guide those students and give them manners in which they can acquire the comprehension. So even if they're maybe not reading at grade level, they can still comprehend that story.
The biggest challenge for me is finding time to use it. It can be lengthy, especially if it takes a few different books, different levels. And I teach first grade, so especially in September, they're not very independent to work on their own, so you have to really find time during guided reading, during literacy centers, when they're, you have to kind of find the time to do it, so it can take a while.
It's very hard for the language arts teacher to assess all of their students in a timely, beneficial manner. So we did do that. All the homeroom teachers, most of them were trained, very willingly too. It was great to see that their collaboration and they wanted to do it. So we changed that. Homeroom teachers are doing their own assessment for the most part. Once I'm done, I've started doing ones from other homerooms. And I think that this will show them, I think it gives them personal insight to the reading levels of the students. So I hope that we can keep up with this change. That has really been a big plus. Another change would just be if we could come here with our students, have them sent down, or have one here at a time, 2 or 3 waiting out in the hall. Having a quiet atmosphere like this room would be super.
Anything else you would like to add?
No, Fountas and Pinnell has its drawbacks, but I do think it does give us information that I think is necessary for the benefit of our students.